I'm Yoshito Darmon Shimamori, and let me share the screen. Share. It is. Okay, so I think you can see the screen.
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
thank you. So I'm Yoshito Darmon Shimamori, and as you can see on the slides, I'm the founder of the Library for Multilinguals. I'm a secondary school language teacher as well, and I'm a dad to these two boys you can see on the photo that my wife and I are raising in French, Korean, and English. And so here you have a list of where you can see all my resources. So I have Instagram, two YouTube channels, a blog, and two books. The second one, In Search of the Lost White, is not out yet, but it's nearly there. Yeah, so as I said, so these two are my sons, and today I'm going to talk about our 4-year journey of how my eldest, who is in the middle here, became an independent reader in 3 languages. And we started with him not liking to read at all in English. And yeah, it took 4 years to get there, but in French, so in English, he learned English in school, but in French, it took about 8 months for him to become fluent and independent and to want to read books in French as well. And for Korean, it took quite a few more years. So I'm going to talk about both and what helped him in the end become an independent reader in all his languages. And before I really start, I wanted to emphasize 2 things. So the first thing is that, as I mentioned, it took a lot more time for Korean for him to become independent in it. And so a journey to multiliteracy, to be independent, can take a lot of time or not. So for French, it took a few months, 8 months, and for Korean, a few years. And the second thing I want to clarify is what I mean by independent reader. So I mean that they can read on their own, but also that they want to read on their own. So I was looking for these 2 things when I was trying to have my sons become multiliterate. And so my son's multilingual journey actually began about 25 to 30 years ago, because it actually started with me as a struggling teenager. Oops, here you go. So that's me in the middle with my brother and my family and friends. Oops, I don't know if you see yeah, my family around and my friends. And yes, so I was struggling to read and write in Japanese while growing up in France. And so, yeah, for me, at that time, when I was a teenager, speaking made a lot of sense. Being able to speak fluently made a lot of sense because for me, it meant connecting with my family, connecting with my friends, having fun, spending nice holidays. But reading and writing, because I was living in France, it felt more like an even better if. So if I could read better in Japanese, it would be good, but it's not a must because I thought I would be living my whole life in France. So what's the point of being able to write and read in Japanese? And oops, sorry. Yeah, so I stopped sharing a bit. Yeah, so for me as an adult now, I realized what I missed by not being able to read and write better. And the main thing for me was that I couldn't expand my vocabulary, and I found it more and more difficult to converse with my peers, so friends of the same age who are living in Japan, because there was this gap in my vocabulary that I was able to speak as well as them in Japanese. And so when I became a dad, I wanted to make sure that my sons had a better experience than me. And I focused on mainly two aspects. So it was helping my sons see how much fun they can get from reading, and reading in general, not just in our home languages or in English, but in all their languages. And I wanted to make the experience of learning to read and write in French and Korean a fun and relevant one. Because in school, when I was in school, so I went in primary school, I was attending a Saturday school, Japanese Saturday school. Then in secondary school, I was going to international school where I had 6 hours of Japanese a week. So I was reading and writing almost every day in Japanese. Uh, but it always felt like I had to read and write in Japanese just because I had to, because it was a school subject, and not necessarily because it was useful to me or because I wanted to. Um, so that's one thing I wanted to avoid for my sons, and I didn't want to make it look too academic, and uh, I wanted them to see what it brings to be able to read and write in all their languages. And as I mentioned before, my first aim was to make sure that my sons enjoy reading, because if they like, if they get pleasure out of it, they would be able to carry on their own, uh, and so then they would be able to improve on their own as well and read whatever they want. So from the moment my eldest was born, it was really frequent for us to spend time lying down, sitting down, lying down, reading books together. I would change my voice to match the characters in the book. So it was quite a fun time to spend together. And also because I'm a full-time teacher, when he was a baby, it was really the only moment of the day that I could spend with him and doing something fun. It was when I was putting him to bed and reading books. So uh, that was from the beginning. And on top of that, it was also very frequent that when I came back from school, I would see my wife with my sons sitting in the bedroom with piles of books all around. And they would frequently spend hours reading books after books. Uh, and so this is a habit that we've kept and that we carry on even now. Maybe not reading for hours, but we keep on reading together, and it's part of our habit as a family. Um, and so one thing that I want to stress as well is that living in England, books in English are a lot easier to get. So we have read books in English as well, not just French and Korean. And as I said before, it's because we wanted them to see that it's fun to read and all the fun they can get from reading, not just reading in a certain language. So let me share again my screen so I can carry on with the presentation. Uh, yeah, so that's how it's going on at the moment. So you can see two pictures there where they're reading together. So generally it's my eldest who's reading out loud what's in the speech bubbles. So he would read in French, in Korean or English. And yeah, they can spend time between brothers reading together. Uh, and so creating this love of reading has been quite easy to establish because I guess it wasn't from the beginning. And learning to read and write hasn't been all that simple. So I'm going to cover that mainly today. And there is this saying that says, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink it. So well, it means that even if I want my sons to read and write and I bring them loads of books or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're going to love reading or they're going to want to read either. And so being a teacher as well, I see it every day that if we manage to make the learning fun and the children want to learn, or it's a topic that they're interested in, it's a lot easier to teach them and for them to learn. So one thing, sorry, well, maybe before I speak about that, so just to say that in England, children start to learn to read and write when they're about 5 years old. But at that age, my son wasn't interested, and he probably didn't really see why it was so necessary to put effort in reading when daddy or mommy could be reading the stories. But in school, he would get some decodable books, so books that are very easy to read, that were short, but he found it difficult and probably not that fun. So it was always a struggle to do that homework of reading a book together, a decodable book from school. Um, yeah, and so what I did is to create treasure hunts to make it a bit more fun. So he was learning to read a bit in English. So the first type of treasure hunts we've done is by writing very simple words like your bed. So he would have to go to his bed and find the next clue. And maybe the next clue was saying toothbrush. So he would need to work out what it meant, or toothbrush. So he would go to a toothbrush, try to find a clue around. Then big sofa. So he would go to big sofa, look all around, try to find another um, a clue, or trampoline, etc. And that was the beginning. Then I made it a bit more difficult. So, for example, look under your bed. So it was a proper sentence. Or go to the bedroom and look next to the toothbrush, the bathroom, sorry. So a longer sentence, then I would make it a bit more difficult as well. So where does daddy sit when he watches TV? So he would need to work out it was the armchair or the sofa, and try to look around, etc. And the best thing about this is that there was a reward straight away. So he was reading to be able to get a reward, and the reward would be a cookie or chocolate or a cartoon that we would watch together. And then he was all happy to have found it. So that motivated him to read more in English. And in a similar way, so we've done some obstacle courses to revise for vocabulary tests. Okay, let me know if you don't hear it and I can comment on top of the images.
I'm not hearing anything from the video.
Okay. So, okay, stop the sound for me so I can speak. But yeah, so that was, so when they had to revise for dictation in school vocabulary or spelling test, I would do that kind of obstacle course where they had to find different words and cut out, so they put the letters together in the right order, etc. And for example, they wouldn't be able to touch the floor to make it a bit more challenging, and all that just to make it a bit more fun, for them to learn the spelling of the words they had to learn for school. So I tried to make it more fun and purposeful for them. So the aim wasn't just to learn to write the words or to read certain words because the school said so. It was more because they would be able to do something fun with it. So for example, an obstacle course. And so that's the first, I guess, lesson I took and I would give, is that we need to make it purposeful with immediate rewards, especially when they're younger, to make them want to read. And if you want to watch the whole video, I'm going to post it in the comments in the chat. So you can click and watch it later if you want. And okay, sorry, let me go back to here. So then when did we start with our multiliteracy journey? Because up to now, I've just talked about English. So for French and Korean, because there was no expectation from anyone for them to be able to read and write, we were able to wait, and I waited and waited and waited until my eldest was 6.5 years old. So he started to read and write in English when he was 4, 5 years old. When he was 6, he was probably able to read more or less well in English. But it took some more time for him to be able to be interested and wanting sorry, to read in French and Korean. And so the way it happened, the way I saw that he was interested is because when I was messaging my family in French, he would try to work out what I was reading. And because he could read in English and he had learned how to decode the words in English, he was trying to apply that to French, which helped quite a lot. And then I would be able to tell him, okay, but this letter you read it that way in French, etc. So the good thing was because he was interested in reading French and Korean after he had learned in English, it was that I could leverage all the things he had learned in school. So for example, the fact that the sign on the paper is actually representing a sound, that some signs combined can make a different sound, and then it makes a word, and that many of these signs or to represent sounds that are similar in French and English. So that was quite easy to start with. But just to say that it wasn't, I asked him, oh, do you want to learn to read and write? And he said yes straight away. It was loads of opportunities that I planted. And I waited for him to say that he wanted to learn to read in French. And so we started with French. He started off really well and he was progressing fast. And as I said, because there were lots of similarities between French and English. And so he was happy and I was really happy, a bit too much. And so I was doing also a bit too much. And that put pressure on him until he started to not want to do these games that I was preparing for him to practice reading. So I was demanding a bit too much from him. And so I didn't want him to have a bad experience. So I stopped. And I thought, okay, I'll come back to it when he wants again, or when he's less afraid that there's going to be too much asked from me. And so then he started showing interest after 2 months, but it was Korean. Maybe because it was different language. So he was interested in Korean. And then I asked him if he wanted me to teach him to read in Korean. And so he was at the beginning a bit hesitant. But we agreed on two things. And these were first that the learning games that I was preparing would only be from time to time. So I was aiming for once a week. And also the fact that he would see me prepare all these resources made him want to figure out why I was preparing this. So once a week was quite a good average. And then we said as well that we would stop as soon as he would get tired. And then that was fine. And so he was happy with that and we started. But then I created other games. I didn't want him to have the image of, okay, I've learned French that way, but it was too demanding, so I don't want to do it. So I changed the games. So I used a lot of flashcards. Oh, no, let me go here. Yeah. So that was the first day that's supposed to I put on Instagram. The first day I was starting to teach my son to read in Korean. So you can see that there is the PowerPoint screen. So that was to help a bit with the game. There were flashcards. You can see here that there are cards with letters, Korean letters on it. And he has elastic band and he had to shoot the papers and then read or try to read the cards that had fallen. And so it worked really well. And because after a while, he wanted to start learning again French. And he said in the same way, so with the same kind of games. And I'm going to share another link in the comments. So it's a link to a video I made where I explain how I taught my son to read in Korean. So you have all the details here if you're interested. So it's a different script from English and French. And so you see how the steps I took and how we went step by step. Yeah. So there are two lessons here, so number 2 and number 3. So it was, so don't be more excited than your child and follow their lead. So if you're too excited, it might create some pressure as well, like I've done. And also the third lesson is if your approach doesn't work once, so for example, like for French, you can always stop and come back to it later. And for example, in our case, what helped is that we have two home languages, French and Korean. So the fact that he was okay to start again with Korean made him want to go back to French because it was, he liked the way we were learning. And so if you want to know more about these games as well, as I said at the beginning, I have written 2 books. So the first one is The Parent's Guide to Raising Multiliterate Children. And so on my website, you can read the first chapter for free without buying the book. So I'm going to share that as well if you want to read the book. Yeah. Sorry. Then, so let's go back to the presentation and to see what followed after we started Korean. So that was really just the beginning. And so what helped develop his reading fluency, so we were with French and Korean about the same level at the beginning, but French took off quite quickly because of a few things that we had in French, not in Korean. And these were some books we found. So the first one that really helped is that kind of blocks of games. You can find loads of games like that in a pack. And the reason it was good, it's because you can see there is your instructions at the top that are quite short. And then the game lasts a lot longer. So maybe he would spend like 30 seconds to a minute to try to read properly the instructions. And then he would spend like 3-5 minutes doing the activity. So for example, if it was the Sudoku here, it would take quite a lot of time. There were mazes where he had to go from one point to another by avoiding certain places. And all these, by the way, are great because it helps them focus on details. So for example, you can see at the bottom, it asks, oh, you can't see my mouse, but the bottom one is you have one dragon and you have to spot which one is the same dragon. So this helps the child pay attention to all the small details, which they need to do when it comes to reading and writing as well. And another one that really, really helped with French is Dogman, that is translated in French. And he really loved Dogman, and so much that even when he was at the beginning struggling to read in French, so still at the deciphering stage, he would spend hours reading Dogman. So at the beginning, he wouldn't read every single thing, but the good thing with these comics is that the pictures also, well, you can understand the story just, or most of the story just by reading the pictures. It makes it even better if you can understand what's written in the speech bubbles. So he would probably read the big exclamations at first, read some key pictures where he would think, why is he shouting? So for example, we can see here that he's shouting at the dog drooled on him, all over him. Yeah, and shouting scenes made it better because he found it really funny. So here the fourth lesson is really to find books that your child is going to love so much that they will want to read, even if they find it challenging. So for example, this Dogman, as I said at the beginning, when he was still deciphering words, he would spend hours in an afternoon trying to read as much as possible. And so with the more you read, the better you get, the more fluent you get. And so for reading, it was, I would say, quite easy in the sense that we just had to find books that they enjoyed. and it made it a lot easier. So we just had to spend time looking for them. But writing was a lot more difficult, mainly because we probably didn't find, so except the games, but the games demanded from me to spend time preparing them, and it was generally a short time. So I was trying to find something that would keep him going longer. And journaling was one thing we tried. It worked a bit, but not that much. It didn't, like, he didn't carry on. Uh, but one type of book that really, really helped were wordless books. So I'm going to show you one example that, like, the one that he loved the most is this one. So we have it in Korean, but because it's wordless, there is no word in it, so it doesn't matter. But in English, if you're looking for it, it's called Sector 7. And so I show you, but inside it's a bit like a comic book, and the only difference is that there is no speech bubble, so nothing to read. So at first we would say the story, we would try to figure out what people could be saying. So you have also big scenes like this where there are loads of people doing loads of different things, probably saying or shouting different things, and we'll try to figure it out and say it. And after that, so because I was trying to get to find opportunities for him to read and write, I started to put post-it notes that I shaped into speech bubbles at the bottom of the book. And for example, at the bottom of this page, and he would need to read it and try to figure out where it goes. So who would be saying it? And after that, I went a step further to get him to write a bit. So I would have some speech bubbles that were empty. And so he would place first those that were full, and then try to figure out what other people would be saying. So generally, it was something short and silly, but it was fun, and he was writing. So that was the main thing. And also because he was writing, he found it fun. It was also a good moment for me to explain a few spelling rules or grammar rules at the same time. But it was really short and just a little, and he would take it and write it and learn at the same time. So when it would come again, I would say the same thing, and he would remember and write it properly. So what I was aiming for was really to have him put only like 20% of effort for 80% of fun. So making really fun and a bit of effort with the whether it was for reading or writing. So he would want to read and write more. And so at the beginning it was always a little, but this 20% of effort, even if at the beginning it's a few words, a sentence, and it doesn't seem much, after a while, because they get used to it, they can write a lot more. And even if it's still this 20% of effort, it looks a lot more because they are more at ease that they can write and read faster. And just a little plug-in here. So because I was inspired by this and seeing him so engaged in reading and writing in these ways, I have created myself a graphic novel, which is this one, In Search of the Lost Words, which is for multilingual children. And in the same way as the Sector 7, I have included some empty speech bubbles where the reader has to find out what they're saying. And here I justified it, so you can see that some parts are written in English, some are empty. So the main character, this girl who is Anna, uh, is a bilingual girl, but she is forgetting her dad's language. So she only understands a bit. So when she's surrounded by people who speak that language, she only gets a few words. So you can see here above the, oh, you can't see, yeah, here. Above the speech bubble is written hurry or move. So it's just keywords she understands from what people are saying. And the reader needs to figure out what they are saying and write it either just as words or sentences if they are more at ease with that. And so, as I said before, it's soon going to be available. And for this, I'm running a Kickstarter campaign that's going to start in 10 days, on the 17th. So I'm going to share the link as well if you want to have a look. There is one link, the first one to be notified of the Kickstarter campaign, but the second one is also for you if you want to learn more about this book. Okay, so let me get back to the presentation. So so here there is English that's going well, French that's going well, whether it's reading or writing. And there is, Korean that we're trying to work on and didn't take off that quickly for a few reasons. So the first one is because we didn't find books that he loved, although we got a lot from friends, there were just books that he would find okay and read a bit, but not, he wasn't as passionate as with Dogman, for example, that he would read for hours. So he wasn't practicing that much. So the progress was very slow. And also because for Korean, so I speak a little bit of Korean, so I was able to start with the basics. Um, but my wife is the Korean speaker, so we had to arrange some time to plan together the activities, and it wasn't always possible, so we didn't always do it. So yeah, little by little, that because we didn't do that, and there were not books that he was interested in, it slowed down a lot. And so during the lockdown as well, one thing that we tried to do, because there are lots of things available online, lots of classes, we put our two sons, into a Korean school, a Saturday Korean school. But yeah, our youngest quite enjoyed it. He was having fun in the lessons. But for our eldest, let's just say that he's probably allergic to anything that looks like academic work. So he didn't like it at all, and there was homework. It was a struggle. So he was starting to have a negative experience of reading, writing Korean as well. So in the end, we stopped. And then, so what helped him enjoy more reading in Korean after a few years then, and that what makes him independent is to find really the books that he can't get enough of. So I remember if I didn't put the example. Sorry. Um, yeah, so we found the books that he loved to read. And another thing that we changed is, as I said before, because I'm a full-time teacher, I just see my sons in the evening. So evenings are more the time I spend with them. And so I was doing all the bedtime stories, so mainly in French or English. And then we swapped it, and my wife is now doing a lot of bedtime stories with books in Korean or English. And because they have this series in Korean that they really enjoy, it's mostly in Korean. And then so because she read it the evening but didn't read the full book, then in the morning, I'm going to see my sons trying to read the rest. So they're at the same stage as when they're trying to read Dogman in French. So it's still a bit slow, but getting a lot faster. And the progress is really quick. And now they want to read in Korean as well. So I guess this makes them independent readers in all their three languages. So the last lesson I'm going to share, I think is number 6, is to not stress yourself or your child and go at their pace, because in the end, in 10 years' time, it won't matter if they took a few months to be fluent in reading in one language or a few years. They will be independent and they will want to read, so they will carry on reading on their own. So just to finish, I want to show you, maybe you're not going to hear the sound. Okay, let's try. But it's my son's reading a book in Korean together. Maybe you don't hear. So my eldest is again reading the speech bubbles, and his younger brother is listening. Oh, so I'm going to stop here. Okay, so I went a bit over the 30 minutes I was aiming for, but yeah, so if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself. I think you can just unmute yourself and speak, or you can type in the comments, and I take the questions. Okay, so
I have maybe a question.
hello, Maria.
Hello. Hi. What would you advise to do if you do know the language, but not very well, but you still want to pass it on to your child? So if you make small mistakes, what would you advise to do?
So I guess it's first to do with speaking that you're asking. So I would say if you make small mistakes now, it doesn't really matter because you're going to improve as well. And to remember that you're probably not just the only source of the language, because you can get things online. You can get maybe a babysitter or someone who comes from time to time, or go to groups where there are more speakers of that language, if in your area you have some. But so I would say maybe if you're fluent enough, so you can even use the language when you're tired, or if, for example, there is a danger, you can ask your child to wait. I think that's the main thing. Yeah. Sorry. And also to remember that even if you're at that level right now, because you'll be practicing speaking, your level is going to go up. And yeah, so in the future, you'll be at that level rather than this level. So it's just a temporary state where your language is probably that you deem not perfect enough.